Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Promoting Physical Accessibility in Space Rentals webinar with guest presenter Kim Fullerton. There are just a few housekeeping items to cover before we get started. We will be offering closed captioning throughout the webinar today. We are just starting to integrate closed captioning into our webinar programming. So we kindly ask that you please forgive any troubleshooting that may come up, as this is our first time. The closed captioning will be happening at the bottom of the screen, where participants can change the font type, size, and color of the text. A recording of the closed captioning will be sent to participants following the webinar and made available on our website as well. At this time, I would like to ask a participant attending the webinar to confirm in the chat box in the bottom right that they can see the closed captioning pod and that it is working. Perfect. Thank you, Dal. Appreciate it. So moving on, we will also be recording this session and we will be emailing out a quick survey following the webinar along with the recording. We ask that you kindly complete the survey so we can continue to improve our learning series for arts facilities in Ontario and beyond. You can hear us, but we can't hear you. Your microphones have been disabled for this webinar, but you can use your speakers or headphones to listen in, and you can adjust the sound by clicking on the speaker icon at the top of the meeting. And lastly, we will have roughly 15 minutes at the end of the webinar to answer any questions you might have. Please use the chat box on the bottom right to type in your questions, and we will get to as many as possible in the time we have. So moving on, my name is Alex Glass, and I am the Program Manager at ArtsBuild Ontario. In case you have not heard of ArtsBuild, we are a nonprofit arts service organization that provides programs and learning opportunities that help make Ontario's arts facilities more sustainable. One of our programs is the Learning Series, which is a series of webinars, workshops, and resources that support our core programs, which are Spacefinder in Canada, the Arts Facilities Mentoring Network, Asset Planner for the Arts, and our Energy Conservation Program. We are working currently with Work and Culture to develop the Learning Series, and I will now turn things over to Steph Draker at Work and Culture to share a little bit more information on that. And Steph is experiencing a little bit of a delay, I think, on the line, so we'll just give her a few seconds to speak about Work and Culture. And if not, I might just do their intro for them. Okay, so Work and Culture. We've partnered with them on the Learning Series, and their mission is to support people who work in the cultural sector through lifelong career development and entrepreneurial and business skills training. We've partnered with Work and Culture for many years in the past, particularly with our Arts Facilities Mentoring Network. And we also partnered with them to create our Creative Space Rentals workshops, which we will be announcing in our upcoming newsletter, so stay tuned there for sure. If you'd like to learn more about Work and Culture, please visit www.workandculture.ca. So our presenter today is Kim Fullerton, who is the founder and CEO of Akimbo Art Promotions and is also from Calgary, Alberta. Akimbo Art Promotions offers digital promotional services for hundreds of Canada's most important cultural organizations. She has worked in the Canadian visual art sector since 1983, and as an artist, curator, writer, administrator, publicist, arts consultant, and entrepreneur with extensive experience in cultural organization, gallery management, and audience development. She has organized numerous exhibitions as an independent curator and written for magazines, catalogs, and newspapers. In 2016, she spearheaded the organization Access Visual Art to promote barrier-free galleries. She was recently awarded the RCA Medal by the Royal Canadian Academy of Arts for her service and contributions to visual arts in Canada. Now, I would like to turn things over to Kim for our presentation. So over to you now, Kim. Oh, and you just might want, oh, there you go.
Can you hear me? Great. Okay. Hello, everybody, and welcome. I want to thank you for being here today. I'd also like to thank ArtsBuild Ontario and Work and Culture for this opportunity to present this webinar. I'm here today to address physical barriers in our art venues and rental spaces. And of course, addressing physical barriers is only part of what we can do to make our spaces fully barrier-free. It's a much more complex process and would likely take up the time of many more webinars than just this one today. So for today, I'm focusing on physical barriers because it's something I know, and that'll be the focus. So this is me in the image. As you can see, I am a wheelchair user, and so much of what I'm talking to you today about also comes from lived experience. The statement at the top of the page, which says, what disables people is the built environment, not their disabilities. It embraces a social model of disability rather than a medical model. And so in a nutshell, the social model indicates that people encounter disabling experiences not due to a medical condition, but rather as a result of social conditions such as environments and attitudes, legislation, etc. So this is a shift in thinking towards a social model that I want to encourage as we go through this webinar today. I'd also like us to think beyond compliance and in terms of creating a culture shift. Of course, a fully accessible environment is more than just ramps and accessible washrooms. So when we start to look at accessibility in our spaces, we want to think more in terms of inclusion and how to include people who are deaf or blind or have mental health disabilities or other disabilities. And I think that we can help to change the culture of at our institutions and include best practices around the inclusion of all people with disabilities when we start to make this shift in our thinking and a culture shift. So, you know, I truly believe that we want to do this as workers in art spaces because it's a value system that we adhere to. It's one that understands that people with disabilities are not just our audiences, but they are our directors and artists, curators, writers, volunteers, staff, board, and interns, business owners, and renters. They're all of us. So of course there are the compliance standards that many of us are already aware of, such as the AODA, which is the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, the Ontario Building Code, the Canadian Standards Association, and the London Facility Accessibility Design Standards. So these are our compliance standards that we're aware of, but I'm not going to get into any too much detail on any of these today. So today what I'm going to do is take you through essentially a self-assessment, so you can see how barrier-free your space is. And the questions in this assessment that we're looking at today come from three sources. One is an online survey produced by Access Visual Art, which is the organization I co-founded a couple of years ago, which is a group of people with disabilities who work in culture and whose mission it is to work towards barrier-free built environments in our art venues. The second source of the questions for the assessment come from Access TO, which is a website and mobile app or a charitable foundation that AVA partnered with to produce accessvisualart.ca. So Access TO has been around for about 5 years, and they have, as I mentioned, a website and a mobile app that document access features in a range of venues, including clubs and restaurants and art venues. And the third source of our assessment data come from the London Facility Accessibility Design Standards. And that's a standard, those standards are what AccessTO uses when it goes into sites to do assessments or what they call audits. They take in a 50-point accessibility criteria checklist, and that's essentially based on the London Facility Accessibility Design Standards because they feel that it's more comprehensive than even the AODA. So I just want to mention that at the end of this webinar, I'll give you a link to the ABA survey where all the questions are that we've just gone through. So you can actually go through this yourself online later and just for the information. And you can also submit the data, and then it will enter the Access Visual Art and AccessTO databases. Plus, I have for you, and Alex will send out to you a PDF handout that gives a list of resources, including builders, designers, architects, various firms who are familiar with universal design and creating barrier-free buildings and environments, as well as other kinds of consultants like AODA consultants and broader accessibility consultants and more. So what we're going to cover today is in our barrier-free self-assessment are these 5 areas: the entrance to venue, inside of the venue, outside the venue, the language we use to describe each other and people with disabilities and our spaces, and then finally some information, some points on promoting your accessible space. So let's start with the entrance to spaces. This is an image of the Durham Art Gallery, and I wanted to use it because it's a small rural gallery that is fully accessible. Well, I shouldn't say fully accessible. It's wheelchair barrier-free accessible, and it made a commitment at some point in its history to find the funding and install automatic doors. So one of the questions in the survey and in the assessment, of course, is your entrance at street level without steps? This is, sorry, I'm just ahead of myself here. You want to describe, when you start describing your space online or verbally over the phone, etc., you want to give as much detail and precision as you can. So describing the entrance is very, very crucial. You want to let people know if there are or aren't steps. You let people know whether there's an automatic door, whether the pathways to the entrance are unobstructed, and is the entrance visible from the street, or is the entrance around the side of the building or down a passageway? Does your entrance have steps? And if so, how many? And so this is necessary information to provide for people, especially for people using canes or crutches or walkers, because they may be able to manage getting up 1 step, but they may not be able to get up 4 steps. So yes, my venue has steps. It has X number of steps. Important detail. It's always great to include photographs or video of your entrance. As you can see in the images we've looked at so far, they tell us a story. They give information on what somebody approaching that venue is going to have to deal with. When you do have a step like this is the Paul Petro Gallery in Toronto, you can determine whether you can build a permanent ramp or not, and in that case you're going to have to talk to your city and look at building codes. Or can you get a portable ramp? Does your entrance have a permanent ramp? If you do have a permanent ramp at your entrance, make sure it's in good repair. This one that we're looking at on an Artscape building in Toronto is not in good repair. It, in fact, makes that space inaccessible because the standard threshold into a venue is 1/2 inch. and that lip at the end of that ramp is about 1.5 inches. And so many wheelchair users will not be able to get over that. So keep your ramps in good repair. Make sure they're not buckling nor cracked, because those can really hinder people. If you are considering building a permanent ramp, you know, you'll of course look at building codes, but one of the things that you want to look at are gradient. The preferred gradient for a ramp is 1:12 ratio, which means that you multiply the height of your step or steps by 12, and that gives you the minimum length of your ramp. So, you know, if you have a step or a couple of steps into your venue, consider whether a portable ramp will work. There we are, we're back. If you have a portable ramp, you may want to leave it out all of the time, but many people will bring it indoors. And so it's always great to have the stickers such as the one to the right. So there's this great organization in Toronto called Stopgap.ca. They're a charitable foundation. They have a couple of programs that are really interesting. One is called Request a Ramp, and that's where they custom build ramps for you, from single step deployable ramps to permanent building code compliant ramps. And another program which is also successful and is countrywide is called the Community Ramp Project. And this is where volunteer groups start out in local communities, and they get donated materials and paint, and they build ramps for a series of businesses in their areas that require portable wooden ramps. So I encourage anyone who needs a ramp to contact Stopgap.ca, and if it's not permanently left out, get a sticker such as the one to the right, which they also provide. It's you know, essentially says welcome, and we have a ramp upon request. Just call or text this number and we'll bring it out for you. Does your space have an alternative entrance? So this is Scrap Metal Gallery in Toronto, and its main entrance, its pedestrian door, has about a 6 or 8 inch step up. So they will open the garage door for people, but of course you have to either be with somebody or call ahead, because they don't have an actual sign at the entrance, which would be useful, telling you that they'll open that garage door. So let people know whether you have an alternative entrance. It might be down the side of the building or at the back. And so announce that information, as I said, either with the sign at the entrance or on your website and on your mobile and your printed materials. Okay, let's move inside the venue now. When people are entering your space, how welcoming is your space at the entry point? And so looking at this space, I mean, do you think it's welcoming to me? It didn't feel very welcoming. It's the information desk at Harbourfront Centre. So the person behind that desk doesn't even actually know that I'm there, and I wouldn't know she was either unless I'm backing up. So make sure that your service counters, your tables, and other surfaces are low enough that people using wheelchairs can actually see over and use. So the standard accessible height for a desk like that is 29 inches. So the whole desk doesn't need to be. I've seen many reception desks that are at 2 heights, one for standing and one for people in wheelchairs. Inside the venue still are your hallways and viewing spaces free of obstacles. So this is an exhibition space in a gallery in Toronto where I couldn't access the headphones to the videos that are above them without moving those seats. So you know, when you're setting up spaces for viewing like that, take into consideration the different ways that people enter spaces and move through them. Not everybody is walking and able-bodied. Other things to consider in your hallways and viewing spaces are whether hazards are clearly marked, such as step up or a wet floor. Are the emergency exits clearly marked? Is the path to the emergency exit clear of obstructions? And give information like the width of your hallways. The standard accessible width is 54 inches. And so why is it important to let people know the width of your hallways? Well, because there are different sizes of mobility devices. You could see in the images that my wheelchair is quite small, manual, it's narrow, it's only 28 inches wide, but many larger things like scooters or power chairs are much bigger than my chairs. And you also want to take into consideration that people may need to maneuver in your hallway, like turn around. So that's why some detail about width is so important for us. How usable is this kitchen? This is a kitchen that I have to deal with almost daily in my work environment, and it really is not very functional for me. It's a standard IKEA kitchen. The countertops are too high. They're 36 inches high, which means I can't actually do the dishes. Countertops in kitchens can vary depending on who's using it and what size of a chair they have. But if you want to find some median in there, you want to look at a countertop that's about 31 or 32 inches with a shallow sink underneath. You can buy at hardware stores sinks that are much shallower than a typical normal sink, so that it allows people to get to roll under it. So one thing you want to do when you're building the kitchen is provide roll under space under the sink. You want to make sure that the faucet is, the handle is reachable. Are the electrical outlets usable, reachable? In this case, they're not, because they're on the back wall. And are the appliances reachable and usable? In this case, I can use most of the appliances in this kitchen. Here's a rendering of a kitchen that I like, a modified kitchen. You can see that the counter in the middle has been lowered from the height that the original height, which is at the ends. There's roll under space under both the sink and the stove. The yellow arrow is pointing out electrical outlets on the curtain of the countertop. The appliances are accessible and usable, and the fridge is the two doors, which gives easy access to both freezer and fridge. So let's look at accessibility features of washrooms. Questions to ask yourself or to consider while you're looking at your washroom is it on the main level or is it reachable by elevator? Is it a single occupancy washroom or a stall in a washroom? What we're looking at here is a single occupancy washroom. It's probably gender neutral, so anybody can use it. What are the dimensions of the accessible stall? There are different guidelines in all of those compliance standards that we looked at, but the most common dimensions for an accessible washroom is 72 by 72 inches, and that's for a stall. Is there an automatic door on your washroom? What's the door width? The minimum door width for a washroom is 35 inches. Are there two grab bars around the toilet? And what is your sink height? The standard sink height is 29 inches, and you want to make sure that the space under the sink is clear and people are able to roll under it, and if it's free of obstacles. Look to see where the paper dispensers and the soap are they reachable by somebody in a wheelchair, or are they easily accessed near the sink for somebody using a walker or canes? And one of the things that hardly ever occurs in these washrooms, and I wish it did, is are usable mirrors. So are your mirrors lowered or tilted so that people, in essentially a seated position, can actually see themselves in the mirror? is so some of our space rental spaces, of course, has fixed seating, and there's different kinds of fixed seating. Many of our venues, unfortunately, don't have modular seating that's adjustable. In this venue, which is Small World Music in Toronto, their seating is fixed, and it's not modular in the sense that some of those chairs can't be removed. So people in wheelchairs get stuck in front of the front row, and that's extremely uncomfortable. Many people don't like sitting in the front row of a venue anyway, but to have to sit in front of the front row is very uncomfortable. It's unpleasant. I don't like that experience. It also means that I can't be in the audience. I can't be a part of the audience, and I don't get to sit beside my friends and actually talk to them. Of course, one of the things that you also want to check is this your stage wheelchair accessible? Many people who are going to rent your stage for what your facilities that might have a stage in it may be in a wheelchair or using another mobility device where they are going to need a ramp up onto the stage. I'm being a bit flip here. Take a seat and check out the glare. Often when you're seated, when you're in a wheelchair, things in galleries are illegible. They're not. We can't see them. Touch screens, for instance, that are hung too high. If you're looking up into them, you're going to see essentially the ceiling lights. So you're looking at glare. Same with exhibition spaces. Work is often hung at a height that's only picking up a glare from pot lights, and so we don't actually get to see the work, and that's especially the case with works that are covered with glass. So check your space. Are your light switches, your electrical outlets, and your touch screens, other technical equipment, are they reachable? Are text panels and wayfinding signage low enough to read, and do they have large font sizes? Are they of high contrast? So for instance, black text on a white ground as opposed to something like black text on a red ground, which is not legible. If things are hung too high, then people in wheelchairs are not going to be able to read them properly or even use them. So moving outside of your space, let's look at parking. The image on the bottom, at the bottom right, is a pretty ideal parking space. It could be a bit wider, but one thing to note is that people who do drive and are in mobility devices, especially wheelchairs, will exit their vehicle from possibly 3 different locations. Lifts come out of a vehicle on the left or right side, and also at the back. So this space, which uses the yellow lines designating that people cannot park there, really leaves it open for all possible options. I'd also encourage you putting the accessibility sign not just on the ground, but on a post in front of the spot, because we all get snow in Canada, and when that's covered up, then nobody's going to know that's an accessible spot if there's no post with a sign on it. Looking at that parking space in the top left, it's probably obvious to all of you why it's not a useful parking spot, but it was in front of a facility. It had an accessible parking sign on the pavement, and if you parked there, then you parked essentially on top of the ramp, and you couldn't get up the ramp to the sidewalk to the facility. So I am happy to say that it has since been changed from given feedback from some of us who needed to use that. Also, people are going to be arriving at your venue by different means other than car. They may be coming by public transit or wheel trans or taxi. So look and see if your drop-off and pickup areas are convenient and sheltered. If there is check and find if you can call and find out whether there's an accessible subway, streetcar, or bus stop nearby. Put that information on your materials. That's a really generous gesture to let people know who may be wanting to rent or use or visit your facility whether or not there's accessible parking or transit nearby, and it's going to make it way easier for people to plan their visit to you if you help them. So that's just a really nice, generous gesture to go to that length. Also, outside of your space, how easy is it to get in? Are your entrances and pathways kept clear of obstructions such as snow, garbage, sandwich board, and fences? Is your sidewalk access from the transit stop and parking areas, are those sidewalks maintained, and do they have curb cuts? Again, that's something that you can go out and assess for yourself and generously put that information on your materials. And also have a look at your entrance in the evening and see whether or not it has sufficient lighting. No, sorry, I needed a drink there. Language. I like to talk about language in terms of putting people first. So we have recommended terms on the left. So starting with people with disabilities is preferred over disabled people or invalids or special needs people. Wheelchair user recommended over wheelchair bound or confined to a wheelchair. So as you can see, it's the language that's preferred or that's recommended designates people as nouns rather than adjectives. Person with a hearing loss as opposed to a hearing impaired, person who is blind rather than the visually impaired, a person with a mental health disability as opposed to a mental patient, person who has a particular condition. So you would want to say a person with multiple sclerosis rather than a person who suffers from MS or is afflicted by or stricken with or a victim of. We're not victims, we have disabilities. Terms like accessible parking and accessible washroom are preferred over disabled or handicapped. So these terms are important. It's part of what gives people with disabilities agency and autonomy and dignity. And I think that it's an important language for us all to adopt and participate in. So promoting your accessible space. So these are pretty much the typical things that we all do. We use social media, website, our mobile apps, various kinds of print media, our newsletters. And in all of those materials, I encourage you to include as many images and as much detail as you can. Let people, and also let people know who you are and what your commitment to inclusivity is, that you are committed to it in the long term. Get your message out and tell stories about your commitment. On your website, give, as I mentioned, give as much detail as you can. Make a page just for accessibility information and publish that URL in your other materials. And include images either as photograph or video in your materials, such as an entrance shot from the exterior of the building. And I am emphasizing the exterior of the building as opposed to the interior. It doesn't help me if I want to go to your building to have an image of what your entrance looks from the inside. I want to see it from the outside. I want to know what I'm going to be approaching. Include images of the interior space showing the viewing and the rental areas, washroom, kitchen, stage access, seating. You know, if you have, includes examples of signage, and if there's Braille on your signage, include that as well. If you're making videos to promote your space rentals, consider using closed captioning on your video. So now I want to take you through quickly 3 examples of 3 facilities that have their dedicated pages to describing the accessibility features at their venues. And they're all 3 quite different, and so I'll just take you through and sort of compare that, so we can compare them. So this is the Dundas Museum and Archives, and the accessibility page was easily found under the About Us, which was right at the top of the page. And they use big images front and center, which is great. So we have an image of the exterior of the building. As you can see, there are the steps up, and then there's the ramp. And then we have an image of the lobby, which shows us where the elevator is. One thing that would have been useful in here would have been to include information on whether there was an automatic door to the entrance. This is the Art Gallery of Hamilton. What I like about it is they include a paragraph right at the top that describes their commitment to inclusivity. And then they give us information that they have an accessibility plan and policies, but we don't need to read it right here, but they do give us links in case we want to go to it. Then they list their services just in point form, but it's fairly detailed, and they have a range of services, so it's very important that they list them. This is Stratford Theatre. What I like about this accessibility page is their use of icons. These are universal icons that anybody with disabilities or people working in this sector or field understand, and so it's immediate information. And then they give a title or a quick piece of text information about what that service is, and then in a smaller font, the descriptor, and then a link to even more detail. So from my point of view, I think all 3 of these pages are great, and I'd like to see them all combined. An accessibility page that includes images, detail, and icons. One of the things that I wanted to note about these 3 facilities was I went onto their websites and looked at their rental pages, and not one of them included any information in their rental pages about accessibility, and not even a link to their accessibility pages. So that's an oversight. People who may be wanting to rent your space maybe have disabilities, or they may have friends or family or colleagues who have disabilities or who are in wheelchairs. So get that information on your rental pages, or include 1 or 2 sentences and a link over to your accessibility page on your site. So beyond the typical ways that we have to promote our standard promotional tools, I encourage you to become an ally. Become an ally with people in the disability community, because when you make allies, you build trust and you connect, and when you talk and promote honestly and accurately. Think about hosting events with people with disabilities to show how your space is usable, and align yourself with existing disability organizations such as Access.to, Google Maps, Wheelmap, and Access Now. These are all mapping sites and apps that give a lot of detail on accessible venues locally, nationally, and globally. So if you're on those maps, then a wider range of people are going to know about you. And when you make allies in the disability sector, they're going to give you testimonies. They're going to give testimonials. They're going to give you stories that you can use in your promotional material, in your social. When you have people supporting and promoting you, when they're ambassadors for you and your space, that kind of promotion, that kind of word of mouth promotion within the disability and the cultural sectors about your commitment and your inclusion of barrier-free environments is going to go a long way to promoting your environment. Become a change agent. Promote the value of fully accessible and inclusive art, performance, and presentation spaces, And I truly believe that we can all be change agents, that our collective efforts make our culture richer. It starts to create an enabling culture, and one that we can all enjoy and participate in. And take action. I invite you all to fill out the survey at kimbo.ca/AVA. And if you hit submit, that information will automatically get listed on accessto.ca and accessvisualart.ca. There is project funding for building and accessibility to your facilities. I am not an expert on funding. This information comes from ArtsBuild Ontario, and I encourage you to contact them directly to find out more about funding. But we wanted to include this information in the webinar here so that it's available to you. And that's it for me. I thank you for sticking with the webinar and participating, and now I'm here for questions if anybody has questions.
Thank you so much, Kim. That was awesome and so much great information for us at ArtsBuild Ontario as managers of a creative space here in Kitchener, Ontario, and for our organizations to take back with them for their practices around physical accessibility and practices around space rentals. I'd like to invite anybody who does have questions right now for Kim to write them in the chat box on the bottom right-hand screen. And then what we'll do is we'll take them in order. We do have about 15 minutes left, so if you do have something you would like to ask, I encourage you to do so. While people are typing their questions, I did want to speak to a little bit about the project funding available around for arts facilities. The Canada Cultural Spaces Fund is a federal grant. It is matching, and it has an ongoing acceptance of applications, so there's no firm deadline there. It's a matching fund, so you will have to keep that in mind, but they do fund accessibility projects. Enabling accessibility as well, a federal grant that is currently not accepting applications, but when they do announce their openings, it's usually a short window of time. So we always encourage our organizations to have their accessibility projects ready to go and ready to speak about them. And then if you're not signed up already on our newsletter, we encourage you to do so there, because we do always promote that when it does come around. And then finally, for our Ontario arts facilities, we've got the Ontario Trillium Foundation. They also offer funding for capital and under that accessible projects. And then for those of us joining us out of province, I'd encourage you to look at your capital funder as well, provincially. So that's it on funding. In terms of questions, we do have a few that have come through. So I will read those out. And first of all, we've got Gina, who says, "Hi Kim, what is the standard hanging height of artworks in video monitors?"
Hi.
So Kim, if you could answer that for us.
Sure. Hi Gina. You know what? There is no standard, as far as I know. I'm not going to be able to answer that question in any detail, because the standard height for hanging artworks varies from gallery to gallery now. Photo galleries tend to hang works lower than painting. So in terms of being in a wheelchair and looking and having a standard height for hanging video or artworks, there isn't one. So I think that's a process that we go through engaging with people who are in our viewing spaces, who are different heights, or who are using different mobility devices, or in wheelchairs. I just encourage people to hang lower than they typically would. So I'm sorry, I can't give you any more detail than that. I would expect that accessibility managers in education departments at the ROM probably know, they probably have some standard heights that they use in their facilities in terms of hanging information monitors and touch screens, but I don't know about actual artworks on videos. But I'm going to find that out. Thanks for asking.
Great. Suying Ali is asking, or she says, I would like to talk about and think about being an ally in ways that don't tax and put all the responsibility on people with disabilities to do the heavy.
Hi, Suyang. I really appreciate that comment. Allyship is really important, of course, in terms of all kinds of positions that we are in. And so I welcome that your comment about being an ally in a way that takes on some of the work and takes on some of the responsibility and buffers that from the disability sector, because yes, we are doing a lot of the heavy lifting, and so thank you. I welcome your participation.
Yeah, Suying also commented while you were speaking, Kim, that some of her thoughts include always compensating people for the expertise they lend and credit them. So yeah, good to note. April is asking, how do we communicate constructive issues with our venue build in a constructive way that lets people know that they are willing?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just trying to figure out the question. I'm interpreting the question to mean, as a facility manager, you are asking whether or how you can convey your willingness and ability to help people with disabilities as they come in, or is that what the question is? Alex, how do you interpret that?
April's typing, so hopefully. Yeah, I think that, April's typing, so obviously we'll get some clarification from her directly in a moment. But I think it's just an organization trying to convey that they have intentions to help, and I think it's looking for a way to get that information on how they can do so properly and without making assumptions. So April says, yes, we have barriers that we know about. We want to communicate in a better way. So April, I think that might mean things that you might be accessible in some ways and then some not, so you're able to articulate what you have and what you don't have potentially. That's how I interpret that. Kim, do you have any response or thoughts around how you've seen others do it that way or communicate about their level of accessibility in their space?
I think it's really important to work with consultants. There are people who are have a lot of expertise in this that could lend you a lot of expertise, who can come into your space and do an assessment with you or help you, and also work with your communication strategy around that. Whether that's somebody who's an AODA compliance consultant, or somebody out of the disability sector like Tangled Art and Disability. But I think the question is quite general, and you'd have to get into some kind of some detail. So I would recommend working with a consultant. Alex?
Excellent. Thanks, Kim. Lisa Dean has said, in the past when hanging, I have sat in a rolling office chair and viewed the works for visibility, passage room, and glare. Is there some
So I was just reading Lisa Deanne's question.
So Kim, there you go.
Hello? Yeah. I was just reading Lisa Deanne's question. Sometimes it's easier for me to understand when reading. No, there is no standard height for wheelchairs. People I know in wheelchairs, every chair is individual because wheelchairs are modified for individual bodies. Like my wheelchair is 20 inches high, but as I mentioned, it's a very small, compact manual wheelchair. It's probably one of the smallest ones, but it can be modified itself up and down a couple of inches. So, this is one of the issues that we deal with, I think, around mobility devices, is that there are no kind of standard sizes, because there are so many individual modifications to wheelchairs, and some wheelchairs are in and of themselves movable, or they tilt. So Lisa Deanne, no, there isn't anywhere that you can look that up.
Serena is asking or saying, our gallery space is on the second to fourth floors of our building, and their elevator is an antique, which doesn't allow access to all motorized wheelchairs as it is too narrow. Would having a manual wheelchair on site?
This must be the Gladstone Hotel. I used to have my office in that building and use that antique elevator, if it is the Gladstone. No, I don't. I wouldn't say having a manual wheelchair on site is going to be a suitable accommodation, because many people in transferring in and out of a wheelchair is not a straightforward process. People often don't walk. That's one of the things about that goes back to the fixed seating. Most people in wheelchairs do not transfer out of their wheelchairs to fixed seating. That fixed seating is more for people using mobility devices who can stand or walk somewhat, but most wheelchair users don't. So most wheelchair users are not going to transfer out of their own chair, which has been, essentially built for them and their body, into a manual chair, just mostly because it's also unsafe, or it could be unsafe. So I wouldn't recommend it. I think it's unfortunate, but the motorized, I have seen motorized wheelchairs in the antique elevator at the Gladstone Hotel, but this may not be who we're talking about. So the short answer is no.
And Kim, Serena actually confirmed that she is referring to the elevator at the Gladstone. So good intuition there.
I have. I've taken.
Great. Jenny's typing right now.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, not to cut you off. There is a bit of a delay between us, but did you have anything you wanted to add to the Gladstone's elevator or to Serena's comment?
No, that's fine. Thanks.
Jenny just wrote in and said, just pointing out that a manual chair would be taking away independence if someone uses power, or could take away.
That's true. Thanks, Jenny.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. Does anyone else on the webinar still have any questions for Kim before we wrap up? If you do, I'd encourage you to type them now, and then I know that you have one. But, oh, Heather, potentially. Oh, thank you, Heather, for attending. So if there are no more questions, I'd just like to thank everyone for attending today, and thank you, Kim, for presenting, and for Work and Culture for partnering with us on the learning series. If you do have any questions, we will be sharing Kim's contact information, so you can email her directly. Again, we'll also be sharing the transcript of the closed captioning today along with the recording, and we're also sending out an evaluation for the webinar, so your feedback is really important to us, especially on the topic of accessibility. It is something that we'd like to do more with, and your feedback is very important for the future programs that we do offer. Stay tuned for more learning series opportunities coming up in the new year. We will be announcing those in December, so keep your ear to the ground there. And if you have any questions for ArtsBuild Ontario, please let us know. And lastly, oh, there's Kim's contact information, but I would like to thank our funders. So ArtsBuild Ontario and Work and Culture recognize the support of our funders from the Government of Canada, the Ontario Trillium Foundation, and the Ontario Arts Council. Thank you, everyone, and hope you have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you, everyone.